I think I'm just gonna have to immediately say right out of the gate that Silent Hill 2 Remake is basically everything that I wanted it to be. And I can say that I'm just as surprised as anyone about it. I was seriously skeptical when Bloober Team was announced as the developers, but I'm glad they've pretty much proven themselves as the right people for the job. And I'm not a Bloober Team hater by any means. In fact, I actually really liked Layers of Fear, but I also played the Blair Witch game that came out a few years ago, and I really didn't like it. And the word on the street was that the medium wasn't terrible by any means, but it wasn't exactly great either. And I think too that they sort of have competition with the Dead Space remake and Resident Evil 4 remake of last year, but with Silent Hill 2 remake, we've sort of got this trifecta of games that show what remakes should be, and also that single-player survival horror games can still succeed in a market that's dominated mostly by games like Outlast, Amnesia, and more recently, Zoocosis. And I'm actually coming to this game as someone who never played the original Silent Hill 2.
Wanna read it? But don't tell Rachel, okay?
Who's Rachel?
In fact, 2 and 4 are the only main ones that I haven't played. I remember playing through 3 several times when I was younger, and working to get all the endings and getting those alternate costumes and extra weapons for Heather.
What the hell is this thing?
And I did the same thing for the first game, Homecoming and Downpour. And I actually really liked Homecoming when it came out. And I thought that Downpour had interesting ideas like the side quests, but the combat was just really not there. And that's not even to mention PT, the demo that released all the way back in 2014, which is still probably one of the scariest games I've played to this day, along with Alien Isolation. Right, so the setup for Silent Hill 2 is that you play as James Sunderland, a widower who receives a letter from his wife Mary, who passed away 3 years prior, telling him to come meet her in Silent Hill. And not having any sort of sense of natural skepticism, he just kinda heads straight there, and that's where the game immediately picks up, with him on the outskirts of town. And as he makes his way through the town on his search for Mary, he fights monsters, he navigates hellish environments, and meets a whole cast of just total weirdos who seem entirely disconnected from just the whole situation at hand. Like, girl, now's not the time.
Hey, you think I'd look good in this one?
Sure.
The voice acting is also really great, with James being a standout. He sounds genuine and like he really does care for the people he meets. He's just sad, tired, and confused.
Why would you think that?
Maria sounds sincerely desperate for James's affections, and Laura is a pretty believable little brat.
What's a little girl like you doing here anyway?
I dunno. What's a big dum-dum like you doing here anyway?
Got him!
I think all of the performances are pretty great, especially when you compare them to the ones from that PS2 era.
This town is full of monsters. How can you sit there and eat pizza?
And I'm actually going to try to keep this as spoiler-free as possible, because Silent Hill is surprisingly long for a first-time playthrough, and I can see a lot of people not even being through it now a week or so after launch.
If you say so.
But I will say that for people who do that dollar-to-hour cost analysis, I think they'd be really happy here, because, like, not only is the game fairly lengthy, but these kinds of games are all about replayability. Resident Evil 4 Remake and Dead Space Remake both have New Game Plus, so you can fully upgrade your gear, try different tactics, and in Dead Space, try to get that secret alternate ending.
Soon, I promise. Gotta build a little something first.
For me? What is it?
It's a surprise, sweetie. But I think you're gonna like it.
And I don't think it's much of a spoiler that Silent Hill games have always had multiple endings, and this one is no different. And while as of making this I've only gotten one ending, I'm actually pretty keen to see the rest for myself and play through this bad boy another 3 or 4 times.
That's what I keep telling myself.
Before I talk up the rest of the game, I do want to address the PC performance issues. Silent Hill 2 runs on Unreal Engine 5, an engine that several times now has proven not to run very well on modern hardware. Immortals of Avium, as well as Lords of the Fallen, were both gorgeous games, sure, but they had trouble keeping a stable frame rate at launch, and Silent Hill 2 is no different. And make no mistake, this is one of the best looking games I think ever. Environments are highly detailed and character models look great, and James specifically looks fantastic, with his face being able to perfectly express just how sad and tired he is all the time. You know, tired of dealing with this bullshit.
Please open the door. There's something in here.
There is. A big lying fart face. See a fart face?
And I think what really sells it are the eyes. Eyes on all the characters are just great at showcasing emotion.
You loved her, didn't you?
The fog in the game looks really great too. The way it swirls and obscures the environment as well as enemies is nothing short of perfect, really. But being outside in that fog absolutely tanks the frame rate. Outside, the game stutters, it slows down, it drops frames, and can't maintain a frame rate ever. Inside, the story isn't much different. The game looks stunning, right? But it just runs like complete shit. And I guess for the sake of transparency, I ran this on an AMD Radeon 6700 XT and an AMD Ryzen 7700 CPU, both of which should run this thing at a decent frame rate, but just can't. The best solution I could find was to either lower the shadow quality or the resolution. So by the end of the game, I had lowered the resolution down to 1080p in order to stay around 70 FPS at all times. But like, even then I kept having stuttering and frame drops. And that's just such a shame because Silent Hill 2 Remake does look really good. I mentioned the fog looks perfect, but they also do a lot of great work with lighting. Interiors are dark as hell, but your flashlight always just kind of shows you enough to get by. And that kind of sounds like it might be a bad thing, but it really does just add to the immersion in the environments that Silent Hill aims to have. But it's not all just walking around and shining your flashlight on gross environments. There's also plenty of combat. Throughout the experience, you'll fight a ton of monsters with both melee and shooting. And the shooting is fairly straightforward, with the over-the-shoulder camera angle we've grown accustomed to ever since Resident Evil 4. Over the course of the game, James is going to get a pistol, a shotgun, and a rifle. And all of these are pretty satisfying to use, especially the shotgun, which will flat out one-shot most enemies and send them flying back. And James isn't a trained soldier or a rookie cop, he's just kind of some sad sack, and so aiming has a lot of weapon sway and guns have severe recoil. But then the melee has a bit more to it. You have a swing attack and a dodge, and so fighting enemies comes down to reading their attacks, dodging, and then countering. And after enough hits, James will flat out put enemies on their backs, allowing for a Dead Space style curb stomp to put them down for good. And you are going to want to stomp them a few times, because they can and will get back up when you have your back turned to them. And you'll be doing a lot of this up-close fighting, because ammo can be a bit scarce in some areas. And I actually found the best strategy to be shooting enemies once or twice with the pistol, and then putting them down with a couple of melee hits. And then I would save the rifle and the shotgun for when there were multiple enemies and I kinda needed to thin the ranks quickly so I could focus on one guy. And as far as what you're fighting, there are only a few enemy types in the entire game that you'll fight pretty regularly. There are these stitched up body bag guys that spew acid or something at you, and they're not too much of a threat. But then you've got these, I don't know, leg people. And like, not only are these guys just kinda gross to look at, but they're super annoying to deal with. They're faster to dodge, they can run away and hide, and later on they'll start climbing the walls and ceilings to do jump attacks at you. Then there are the nurses. And I've kind of heard the joke that young men everywhere were sexually confused by these ladies, and yeah, I get it. I mean, they lure you in with those short skirts and then attack you, leaving you with no choice but to give them the Chris Brown treatment. And I guess it is a shame, but Look, at the end of the day, I guess I'm laying pipe no matter what, right? And there are a few boss fights throughout the game as well, and these are pretty simple, but do have great visual design, but I'm not going to show any here, spoilers. So while I actually think the combat is probably the weakest part of the experience, I don't think it's by any means bad. The camera can get stuck in corners sometimes, and the enemy variety is a bit lacking, but it never became tedious for me. And the melee combat is actually pretty good, I think. And it was always satisfying to lay out some creature and then stomp it into paste. But the combat has always taken a bit of a backseat to the puzzles in these games, I think. And the puzzles in Silent Hill 2 are pretty fantastic. They're often multi-layered and require you to fully explore the environment you're in to find parts or keys in order to progress. And every environment in the game acts as a sort of puzzle in itself, requiring you to solve those smaller puzzles to progress through it. You'll be doing a lot of backtracking, looking through your inventory and checking your map to see what you need to do next. And using the map really is a key part of the game. As a great quality of life feature, Jame will mark up the map as you progress, showing you where solved and unsolved puzzles are, helping you keep track of what you've done. He also marks blocked areas and doors that can be opened, as well as ones that require keys. It's all just really intuitive, and all of the puzzles are super satisfying to solve. Like, I don't think there was ever a puzzle where I felt it was too obtuse or a solution I felt just was dumb. I had a bunch of those oh moments, that kind of made me feel a bit smart when I realized what the solution was. What I did take a bit of an issue with is all of the cart pushing that you have to do. Pushing objects around to climb up on is something that we've kind of been doing for decades at this point. And maybe there's not really a better way to get the player through an environment, it's just you do it a lot here. And maybe it's just me, that's fair, but it's a small complaint. And I guess in the modern video game landscape, I'll take pushing these carts everywhere over microtransactions any day of the week. And it's worth mentioning too that the game actually has a difficulty scale for those puzzles as well as the combat. I played with both set to normal, and it never felt too difficult or too easy, at least when it came to the puzzles. Because playing on normal, I actually thought the game was a bit too easy. I mean, I actually never died. And on a first time playthrough, that's pretty wild, right? And I think the game might actually have a sort of adaptive difficulty, because while ammo and health items are scarce, I found myself sometimes having a bit of a surplus. And when I did, I'd find more empty drawers and boxes than I feel I might normally have. And sometimes enemies would go down in just a few hits, but then I'd find myself up against one of those nurses who just wouldn't die. And maybe I was just imagining it, but it did feel like Silent Hill just had a bit of adaptive difficulty. So I think if you're familiar with survival horror games, hard mode might be the way to go, at least when it comes to the combat. But look, man, after a pretty lengthy playthrough, all I really wanted to do was play more. I think the puzzles are smart and intuitive, and I think the combat is simple but satisfying, and that's all it really needed to be. The environments are highly detailed and look downright terrifying, especially when you swap over to the other world, where Silent Hill takes on this industrial look, with giant fans, metal grate flooring, and tons of bottomless pits. Silent Hill 2 Remake it's everything I wanted it to be. It's scary, it has interesting characters, and it has satisfying puzzles. And not only have Bloober Team proven themselves to be the right guys to work on this remake, but I think they need to be given the reins for future games as well. So I think what I took as reason to be skeptical before is now kind of what I'm going to be looking for when they announce another remake or a new entry in the series. And I do hope that there is a new entry, especially after that Dead Space 2 remake was apparently pitched and shot down, because I think just like Dead Space and Resident Evil 4, the Silent Hill 2 remake is essentially perfect and a remarkable return to form.